Welcome to the Care Conversation podcast. Today, we're joined by Hannah Karim, the customer care lead at Lottie, whose personal journey as a carer for her mum ignited a passion for transforming the care sector. She's now dedicated to helping care-seeking families navigate the challenges for finding the right support, ensuring care homes foster strong, empathetic connections. We'll explore crucial topics from making care funding less daunting to the power of digital storytelling in reshaping perceptions of care. Plus, we'll unpack how care homes can better engage with families, support unpaid carers, and stand out in an increasingly competitive landscape. Whether you're a family seeking care, a professional in the sector, or simply passionate about making care more compassionate, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Hannah, can you tell us about your personal connection, obviously through caring for your mom, and how that's helped grow your passion for care?
Yeah, definitely. I do have that personal connection to care, but I think before all of that happened with my mum, I was sure I wanted a job with social purpose. So those two things ended up coming together quite wonderfully to work at Lottie. But yeah, in October 2017, my mum had a stroke. It was very sudden. As with many of these things, your life kind of gets pulled out from underneath you. And I was 22 years old, so not your average caregiver. Yeah. Just out of uni, just moved back home. And yeah, got a call to say that mum was being rushed into hospital and they suspect that she's had a stroke. And that was kind of the start of a really long journey. It was 2 weeks that she was in hospital. A lot of that time, loads of uncertainty, not really knowing what life was going to look like now. You know, she was super independent before, driving around, doing whatever she wants to do, independent woman. And then, yeah, quite quickly that all changed. And yeah, no one kind of prepares you for those moments. And yeah, so I was just by mum's bedside for those 2 weeks, waiting to kind of hear what the future might look like. And then she was ready for discharge 2 weeks later to come home with outpatient care, reablement care with some home carers. But yeah, you know, there's so much to witness and change about your day-to-day life. And yeah, starting to realise that there's pretty big things that can happen as life goes on. And yeah, trying to prepare for them as best as possible. And then yeah, fast forward a few years and I am able to help thousands of people in similar situations through the service at Lottie.
That's amazing in terms of, obviously you've been through the experience that almost a lot of people are kind of, when people are going into care, all they care about is trust. They want to make sure that care homes, you know, look after their loved ones and build that trust. With your caregiving experience, how does that help shape the advice you give care homes when it comes to building those kind of connections and building that trust?
Yeah, anyone that I speak to, whether they work in a care home, whether it's a member of the Lottie team, no matter what department they're in, a member of my team delivering the service to families, it can seem so obvious, but to remind people that these are genuine humans dealing with some of life's most stressful situations and going through life-changing moments, because that really was my experience. You know, the effect on my sense of self, my ability to work, my mental health. And so, yeah, I think just reminding everyone that there's real people behind these stories. And, you know, if you work in a care home, you're dealing with hundreds of inquiries, thousands of inquiries, and it can be quite easy to forget that one person, it's super real to them and they're the only one going through that experience. So tailoring it to them, I think, is always very beneficial.
It's really interesting because we find with the care homes that we work with, they don't necessarily harness and make use of the stories within and the human side of care. Much like what you're saying there, but how can care homes get better at building out the human stories and promoting those to actually get people to trust what they're doing?
I think whenever you're making any decision, when you're delivering a service like care, is putting yourself in the shoes of the potential resident, the family member, the loved one that's maybe inquiring on their behalf, and thinking, if that was me, if that was my nearest and dearest, what's important to me? What do I want to see? What do I want to know? And, you know, in my experience, my mum's a very proud woman, and she really didn't like the idea of anyone helping her do anything that she could once do independently. And if anyone was going to help her, she'd rather it be me, which is difficult, you know, in itself. Like that's a lot, and we might talk about it later, but that kind of responsibility of caregiving. But yeah, like you say, it's that trust. And so for me to have the trust in care staff to care for my mum in a way that is respectful and tailored to her, and I can then reassure my mum of that, so she's more open to receiving it. So yeah, it's just really thinking about what would you want if it was you, and what would you want if it was your loved one. I think that helps you make the most informed decisions.
Really interesting. And so it's that connection between personal experience and obviously, you know, building the trust. Looking at care homes in particular, how does your role at Lottie now, how does that actually connect the two between the human side and the care homes? What are the kind of tactics you use?
Yeah, I guess the service that we've built at Lottie, so specifically within my team, we offer a completely free support service. So care is an absolute minefield to try and navigate. There is so many things to consider, from types of care, funding, all the in-between, the emotional support. And the service that we've built and that I was really passionate about building was one that was really holistic. You know, it didn't just look at a matchmaking service where someone's looking for a care home, they live with dementia, let's find a care home in the area that offers dementia care. Like, that's just barely scratching the surface. Yeah. And I think if care homes can take on the responsibility of that entire journey more, then they just build a way more trusting relationship from the get-go with the people that are considering their homes for their loved ones. So within the service, my team will carry out, you know, kind of 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes plus, initial consultations with families to really understand, you know, who is it that we're talking about. It's not just, like I said, are they living with dementia or not? Are they looking for a care home or home care? It's like, what are their interests? How do they like to pass the time? Do they have any preferences of carers? Do they speak certain languages? Do they eat certain things? Do they, you know, have a certain religion that they follow? What are their spiritual beliefs? What facilities are their non-negotiables? You know, everything. There's so much that goes into making that perfect decision. And it's so important when it's something as involved and personal as care. So, yeah, it's trying to support care providers to also take on that, you know, education piece, from funding to the full scope of what makes the perfect solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you describe, like, you're going into the finer details and building up the story, in essence, of the person who's going into care. And it highlights how important storytelling is and the crucial role that plays for care homes. We've had guests on this podcast in the past, like Sheridan from Life Library, and that's an app for dementia sufferers, and just pulls out the whole life story, in essence, and pictures and documents and articles all in one place, and the whole family contributes to it. And I think having that approach, like understanding who the person is going into care, and it's the definition of person-centered care, is so important. How, for care homes not doing that, do you or the Lottie team ever kind of talk to them and tell them, like, okay, you need to start doing this or start doing that?
Yeah, my team work quite closely with the partner relations team. You know, we have lots of care providers on our portfolio, and so we have account managers that speak to those providers and points of contact day in, day out. And, you know, one thing we talk about quite a lot is call handling. So the first impression that an individual gets of a home is when they pick up the phone and they speak to someone about, you know, do you have availability? I'm looking for care for my loved one. And how that call is handled is really kind of make or break for whether they're going to want to proceed with the inquiry. So, we try and support there as a first step, because like I said, we pride ourselves on going into a lot of detail when we speak to families. And so to try and emulate that for care homes, I think can really help. It's so surprising to even know that sometimes inquiries just don't get picked up. There's an issue with just getting through to someone. And then if you do get through to, and then to just get through to someone, and then if the call's not great or they can't answer the questions that you've got, or you feel like they are busy and they're not taking the time to really listen to what you have to say, then that's not a great first impression. So
absolutely,
if we can help with that first impression on the phone, then we find that's a really good starting point.
Let's shift over then to another area of your kind of specialty within your team, and that's funding care. So we help care homes getting more private pay families into care through digital marketing. And I suppose it's becoming more common, isn't it? Private paid or private funded care. What steps can care homes take to make it clear on their websites or in their discussions with families to make that clear and make it easy to understand all of the possible funding options?
Yeah, care is eye-wateringly expensive, unfortunately. Yes. And individuals who have lived very comfortably financially for a lot of their life, care can put them in a situation where they're spending thousands of pounds a week, and quite quickly their life savings, their assets are totally depleted, and they've never been in this kind of position before where they've potentially had to rely on government or the NHS. So people are often going into this extremely blind. And as you say, part of our service is to support people through that funding aspect. Shocking £3.5 billion worth of benefits goes unclaimed each year in England and Wales.
All right, okay.
And I truly believe that number is so big because people don't know what they're entitled to. And if they do know what they're entitled to, they have no idea about how to claim it. So I don't know if you've ever gone through a government form to apply for something, but I sat down with my mum a year or so ago to do the attendance allowance form. It's like a 50-page form. She doesn't have a printer, so that's like step one. How would she even go about filling it in? And I know for a fact, if I wasn't pushing to do that, she would have just gone, it's fine, don't need it, I'll do without. And I think that's really real for a lot of people. So care homes can support in that. And I think, again, taking the responsibility of the bigger picture there of funding, people will be so grateful for the time that you give to breaking down what's a really difficult process into easy to understand steps, and just having someone to talk through those forms with. Again, it's that trust piece, like you're building that trust because someone's offering you their time for something that's going to benefit your situation. And there's loads of non-means tested. Like I said, the attendance allowance is a non-means tested benefit. And lots of people that we speak to and my team speak to will say, oh, but, you know, dad owns his house, so I don't think he's entitled to anything. And they're just so unaware that there's non-means tested support like attendance allowance, there's NHS support that is entirely dependent on whether you have complex or nursing needs. So just opening up that, educating people, and there's a way that we can do it as individuals within the care sector who do have that wealth of knowledge to benefit all the individuals that are going into it completely blind.
Such a good point. I mean, I'm at the opposite end of the scale at the moment in terms of childcare. So my kids, it's all this free childcare hours and stuff. It's so complicated. So I can understand if I'm getting that kind of for childcare and it's not as kind of serious as considering care, it shows people have a lot on their plate.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, you've mentioned it there, the affordability of care, especially for people that are private funders, how can care homes go about kind of helping families understand why it costs so much or the affordability and kind of, what are the steps care homes can take to help break that down for people?
Yeah, I think, I've stepped foot into lots of care homes of lots of different styles, and some will be really good at showcasing what you get for your money. Sounds like an icky way of talking about it, but ultimately that's what people want to know.
Yeah.
They think, I've never spent so much money thousands of pounds a week on something. So what am I paying for? And if you step inside a care home or you pick up the phone, you're speaking to somebody, if they're really clear about what you're getting for your money and why another care home down the road that you also might be considering that might be more affordable, like showcase the facilities that you have, or maybe it's that you don't use agency staff, or maybe it's that all of your rooms have ensuite bathrooms, or you have a dementia specialist on site. All those things are really key and could be the difference to someone being able to stay in your home as opposed to another just because of its affordability. I was really surprised when I kind of entered the care world that all-inclusive is used quite differently between operators, and I think it's really misleading to say you're all-inclusive and then when you step in you're suddenly having to pay for the newspaper and the hairdresser and to get mum's nails done, and you're like, suddenly this doesn't feel all-inclusive at all. So using that kind of terminology accurately and just being super clear and super transparent about what people are paying for, it only does you better to do that.
It's a really good point, and it's that kind of transparency. It's the I suppose the next component or the element is flexibility as well, because care needs change. What one care family might go in at at the start of a dementia journey, and that might quickly change through the stage of dementia. Like, is there any work around the flexibility of finances and being open and honest around that? And how do you approach it with your team at Lottie to advise families kind of looking into that area?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Care providers, they need to run businesses, they need to make money, and there's people coming in with really difficult, awful stories and experiences that people have gone through. And I know that there will be lots of passionate people working in those homes that if they could, they would just give whatever care was required and not ask for any money in return. But that's just not realistic. There's lots of not-for-profits out there that are care providers. They have care for life schemes, home for life schemes, which essentially means that no matter someone's financial situation, if they entered the home as a private funder, they had proof of funds for X amount of time, when their savings start to deplete and they would then be able to get support from the council, they would never need to leave because the charity arm of that provider would be able to support them to stay there. That's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
So educating yourselves on that and keeping an eye for that. Supply is always an issue. So whether they are located in the right kind of places. I think also in terms of, like you said, care needs change. And if someone is looking for care for their loved one and they're living with early stages of dementia, for example, if they come through my team service, then we're explaining to them that their care needs might change, and what you probably want to do is future-proof their care choice. So whilst they currently don't need specialist dementia care, they don't need sensory rooms, and they don't need the support of a registered nurse, that's probably peace of mind to have that under that roof. And ideally you want a home that's going to be able to accommodate them throughout that whole journey. So they may live very happily and safely in the residential community when they first move in a year after their diagnosis. But ideally, you don't want the upheaval of them moving in, 3, 4, 10 years' time as that dementia progresses. So they would be able to kind of move within the home to different units to kind of accommodate what they need.
Let's circle back to the very start then, when families are starting to look for care. What, in that early care journey, what are the kind of features that families are looking for? Are there things that stand out more than others, or is it that I just want somewhere to take good care of my family member?
It's so different between each person that what makes the perfect home can be night and day between two individuals. So we never have any assumptions, it's just asking them, what does that look like for mum? Everyone loves a garden space. I think if I think about my future care home, which I've definitely thought about that a lot in the last 3 years, more than I ever thought I would. Yeah. Outdoor spaces, ensuite facilities, activities, a really rich and diverse activities calendar. The openness to cater to someone's dietary requirements. If mum doesn't fancy something that's on the menu, will you make her a jacket potato? Are you open to that?
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of flexibility. We spoke about the enrichment and the stimulation. A lot of people move into care home environments because they're living really isolated lives. So they want to know that the community that they're moving into, they're not going to be sat in their room on their own unless they want to be. They're going to have residents to engage with, staff to engage with, and activities to engage with as well that kind of play to their interests.
And I suppose one of the key elements is obviously it's a big jump from living in your own home. Obviously there's home care, but sometimes people go straight into care homes, into specific kind of specialist nursing, dementia, whatever it may be. And that jump is often massive. And I'm sure for the people going into the care home, it's that kind of their identity or independence is really important to them. How can care homes kind of almost discuss independence and kind of looking after through those conversations with families? And where is the main conversation coming from? Is it just a care home manager having a call, or is there different approaches care homes can take?
Each care home will have a slightly different org structure, so the person that you speak to may vary. Sometimes it'll be a home manager, sometimes it'll be a clinical lead, a customer relationship manager. The title can change. Yeah. But hopefully you've got a consistent point of contact. I think that's really reassuring, so you can kind of build your relationship with them throughout the process. Because like you say, it's so scary. It's a really scary thing. And if someone's going through something like a stroke or a diagnosis of dementia, or they're going through the motions of aging, all of that is really overwhelming. And like you say, you're kind of losing your independence and worried about losing your dignity and sense of self. So whenever we speak to families, if someone's nervous about that journey, which is super common, then I might suggest that instead of organising a day of back-to-back care home tours, which doesn't sound like the most fun day out.
No, it doesn't.
Could we go down to the local care home and have a cup of tea and a slice of cake with the home manager? Could we sit in on a music activity, because mum really loves music? There was a family that I helped a couple of years ago, and their mum was living with quite advanced stages of dementia. She was kind of going through that shift of, she was living independently, and then she started to wander and things started to become unsafe, and it became quite clear she needed a purpose-built environment. But she was still very understandably agitated about the thought of moving environment. And I worked with an amazing CRM at a Care UK home, and the family felt so reassured because they really tailored that whole process to mum. Mum loved gardening. Her garden was her pride and joy, and their first experience of the care home and mum's first experience of the care home was out in the garden. They sat out, they had a cup of tea. And so while the son was talking to the CRM about, the logistics, the paperwork, the boring stuff, mum was, pruning the trees and smelling the flowers. And that's just such an authentic and personalised experience for her. And that CRM saw that person as an individual and emulated the experience that she would most enjoy, that would feel most safe. So that then, yes, when she moved into that home, she got, I think, a gardening kit to start, planting seeds and things like that. So I think, something as personalised as that makes the journey far less daunting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like that, again, personalised. You're talking about each person in focus, and everyone's care journey is going to be different stages, and everyone's going to seek information. It's not going to be the same information they're looking for. It could be about the food on offer. Can you customise it? The activities, the garden, the facilities, whatever it may be. How can families best find this information? And how do you, obviously you've got to advise people on different care homes and the different options available. How do you find your information? I assume it's going to be online, on the websites, on what the care homes are presenting outwardly.
I think that assumption is true in lots of cases. Definitely the partners of Lottie, because we're really adamant that we offer all the relevant information through Lottie's website. So a full list of facilities, some example activities, photos, videos, virtual tours, everything that you would kind of want to be able to start the process. But transparency is not commonplace in the care sector, sadly, and that's in relation to availability, fees, and everything else that we've kind of covered. So my team are in a good position where we have access to that from Lottie's portfolio. So yeah, I guess it's, if you haven't got access to that information for the provider that you're considering, then that being your kind of first port of call when you make that initial inquiry. And even if a care provider wants to go straight into the details of, we have a room available, when do you want to come for a tour, or we can book an assessment tomorrow, and kind of speed you through the process, just go, I've got mum's non-negotiables. Let's just consider whether this is even an option we want to look at. But hopefully we get to a point, and this is what Lottie is trying to do, where transparency is commonplace and all of that information is readily available.
Yeah. Have you seen families mention features on Lottie or on care home websites like blogs more prominently, pictures, or even videos? Are there kind of certain features that families always kind of pinpoint, oh, I saw this, I saw that? And does that help kind of understand, okay, well, when it comes to Lottie and the way that things are laid out and the information structure, are there certain kind of key points that you would advise care homes do?
Pictures and videos. The media of your home is huge. What's an example room, bedroom that my loved one might be living in? Showcasing residents in those photos. So it's not just a stock image of a living space, but showing people in that living space, enjoying that living space, an activity being run in the lounge with residents enjoying it, bringing your environment to life. And there's people within those homes that will have spent so long curating an atmosphere, and before someone can step in and experience that for themselves, the best way you can communicate it is through pictures and videos. So you want to make sure they are doing your home justice. Activities and example menus are so handy for people to be able to access. I think those are kind of the top ones. I guess seeing a list of the facilities that are available. How many rooms of yours are ensuite? Are they ensuite showers? Are they ensuite toilets? Is it single beds, double beds, couples rooms? Do you allow pets to visit? You know, there's so many. And like I said, what's perfect to one person isn't the same as the other. So you can't really make any assumptions. So just be forthcoming with everything that you can offer. So no matter what someone's set list of criteria is, they can see that it's possible within your home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said a key element that we find with videos that we produce for care homes, people buy from people. At the end of the day, if you don't have the people in the videos, people can't relate. They can't understand what's it like for my loved one going in there. It's about facilities, which are great, but people don't buy a care home placement necessarily on facilities. It's about the people and the care first and foremost. And the other element, I'm sure you've seen it, like how many care home groups use stock images on their websites? And it's like, why?
I was just about to say.
Yeah. Genuine people, real people. So
it's heartbreaking. I think it's so obvious when something is a stock image.
Yeah.
And you look at any other decision that somebody makes online, you know, whether they're buying a house, booking a holiday, there's an expectation that there's good quality, genuine photos, and there's nothing worse than stepping into one of those environments, whether it's a care home, a hotel, a house, and going, this looks nothing like the photos I saw online. It's so disappointing. It's making sure that you're investing in the media and that the media is genuine and authentic.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that point. In terms of, obviously, you help and support families from across their care journey. Is there any kind of misconceptions on how soon people start searching for care, planning for care? or is it kind of the usual kind of like you can pinpoint it's like 2 months out, it's 1 month out, it's this, that, or the other, or is it a broad kind of blanket?
We'll get individuals looking for care with very different timelines. There'll be people in emergency situations. You know, if my mum hadn't had made the recovery that she had and we had been looking at a care home, then that would have been immediate. And it would have been a 2-week period from going, mum's totally independent, to mum has to move straight into a care home as soon as possible because the hospital wants this bed back.
Yeah.
So we have those individuals. We have individuals who, like I said earlier, they're living with a condition like dementia, it's progressing, things are starting to happen at home that make them think this isn't fit for purpose anymore. They might be wandering, or an individual might be having falls. And then we've got people kind of earlier on in the journey and they're maybe struggling with isolation. They might have lost a partner that they were married to for decades and they're now living alone. I will always try and urge individuals to consider care sooner rather than later. I don't think any good decision is made in a crisis or in a rush. We don't have the capacity to make good decisions when we are stretched beyond different things like caring for a loved one, work, your own personal life. Life has a lot of plates to spin, so when you have an added one in there, like an emergency situation with your parent, it's easy to drop one of those. So if you can prepare for that inevitable, people don't want to accept it's inevitable, but we're all going to age. We don't know what the future holds. My experience is living proof that everything can change within a split of a second. So if you can have those conversations sooner rather than later, you can ask your loved one what they want from their future in care, empowering them to make those decisions and maybe demystifying some of those stereotypes that they have that make them scared of ever considering care in the future. Then I think that's only a good thing. And you know, we partner with home carers as well at Lottie to try and offer that full spectrum, because you like you said, lots of people who move into care home environments have had care at home. So looking at that full spectrum of care, starting with maybe companionship visits at home, and then going all the way through to complex round-the-clock care in a care home and all the in-between.
Let's shift back to your personal experience a little bit to guide this next section. How can care homes better engage, or home care services better engage with these unpaid carers, often family carers, who may need respite and emotional support? Like, respite seems to be the lead into more considered or more, I don't know what the word is, but established care services. Like, what's that leading?
Yeah, respite is such a growing trend. We see it in all our inquiries at Lottie. Is so many people are booking respite, more and more each year. And I think a big part of that is, fortunately, unpaid caregivers seeking support, and I think that's a really great thing to do. But we call it tactical respite. So it's an individual wanting to kind of try a care home environment on a temporary basis before committing to it long term. So we see a lot of that. We see a lot of caregivers then considering respite care at home, respite care in a care home environment, and then that informing their kind of long-term decision. In terms of care providers better supporting unpaid carers, I think it goes back to my point of remembering that human experience. And it's disappointing to hear some of the ways that inquiries are handled. It's not human at all, and there's a sense of urgency or pressure or a lack of consideration for what that person is going through. And, you know, we'll speak to individuals that are in very stressful situations, and they might not be the most responsive, they might not be the most warm, they might not be the most polite, but you have to have a consideration for what they're going through. Yeah. And it's not for you to kind of react or make a judgment on them. It's just recognising that they need support through this journey that you're very educated to help them with.
And how do you think care homes or home care companies can almost show that they're more understanding of the challenges of caregiving and how they can help?
I think, again, storytelling is huge there, and sharing case studies of families that they have supported through their service. If you're offering a comprehensive service where you've helped them through the discharge process and funding and making mum's room in the care home personalised to her, then showcase that. And if you've given that family member a great experience, I'm sure, and we've realised through Lottie, that they will be more than happy to retell that story. And those individuals that you've supported are the best people to advocate for your service. Deliver an amazing service and people will be happy to shout about it for you.
And you've said it again there. We've spoken about this, but what role does storytelling play in helping the families feel seen and understood on their kind of experience within the care journey?
A lot of caregivers find a lot of comfort in people that have gone through a similar journey. And when I went through that with mum, like I said, I was 22. I didn't have any friends that had been through anything like that. And you kind of get dropped in this entirely different world that you didn't know existed. So whether it's community groups or using services of carers, charities, you can find these communities of people that have had similar experiences and you feel less alone. So if a care home can either showcase that journey, so as an unpaid caregiver, I see that a care home has told that person's story, then I feel seen. And we always, within our service at Lottie, recommend carers support. Like I said, whether that is, we have Lottie's Care Space, which is an online community of caregivers, whether it's signposting them to charities that have helplines or local council or Age UK community groups, then finding those spaces I think is really powerful. So if care homes can create something similar, then you show that you're taking the time to support those caregivers.
Yeah, it's all about connections and community coming together, and that's what care is, I suppose. It's that community, and it's just letting the people that have been outside of it come in and understand it. It's making that barrier a lot simpler for people to understand. So coming on to the process of looking for care then, I can understand it must be the most overwhelming care. Like the only kind of example that I've had of a care journey is what my dad and family went through putting my granddad into care, and how overwhelming it was for them. I can imagine families sitting around the kitchen table having those tough discussions, deciding, okay, we need to look for care. How do we go about it? And it's that process. Like, how can care providers and services like Lottie help simplify those communications and that overload of information from the early days?
I think reminding yourself that you are in a fortunate position to know exactly what this process could look like. And like you say, people will be coming together as family members and loved ones and thinking, what does the future hold? What can we expect to be happening over the next few days, weeks, months, years? So I think mapping out what that might look like. And care isn't a linear journey, so it has to kind of come with that caveat. But even something as simple as saying the average amount of time that this process could take from inquiry to move in, and what steps do we have to follow to get to that point of viewing a care needs assessment, the pre-admission assessment, financial assessment, getting the councils involved, who at the council do I speak to, guiding them through that process and holding their hand can just break it down into digestible steps, and you can take each one as it comes.
So that's the start of the process, and obviously the next big step of once they've got all their information, they're inevitably going to go and visit care homes. Like, what advice would you have for care providers for visits? How to make them, personable?
Yeah, sounds really obvious, but from experience, you will make an appointment, and that person might not always be there. It might be a different person to who you'd been speaking to. And I think that just gets things off to not the best start. So taking that individual's time really seriously and unforeseen circumstances can happen, especially in a care home environment. If the setup of that home is that the home manager is the main person to do tours, home managers are stretched across so many different things. They'll be administering medication one second, they'll be dealing with paperwork the other, they've got a viewing booked at 12 p.m. and that is stressful. So you can find ways of still not letting people down, and I think that's just through communication. But yeah, from the get-go, it's turning up, making sure that right person is there at the right time. And what's one thing that I look out for when I'm visiting homes is the person showing me around. How do they interact with all of the residents, and how do they interact with the members of staff? If residents are excited to see them, if they know the residents by name, then that person is making the effort to be in the community and get to know those residents, and that's a positive thing. And I think going back to the story I told about the son and his mum, the mum was living with dementia, ahead of that viewing, what's mum's interests? What stresses mum out? What should we avoid? What would really interest her? What would pique her interest? What do you really want to make sure she saw or you saw before you leave this home, instead of just a standard loop of the home, show them the same showroom, and that's the end. They've not really seen what mum would be experiencing when she lives there. So taking that time to tailor the viewing to suit that person, or maybe they just want to sit down and have a cup of tea and a cake, and that feels less overwhelming.
Yeah, it's clear, A, you're an expert in what you're talking about, and B, the passion that you have for care. It's obviously a sector that struggles with misconceptions, and we're on that shared journey to try and help break those misconceptions of care. But I suppose you're kind of on the front line of hearing about those misconceptions. What are the most common misconceptions you hear?
I think when it comes to home care, that it'll be a different carer every time, they'll turn up late, they'll stay for a quarter of the time that we've paid them for, they won't really get to know my loved one, that all care operators are interested in is the money that they're making, because that's the only reason it could be so expensive. And I think the main thing, the main mission that we talk about at Lottie is that care should be your next chapter, not your last chapter. And people have this misconception of care homes is like, I'm going to spend my last days here. It's going to be so depressing. I don't want to leave my home because moving into a care home feels like I'm giving up, or it's the beginning of the end. Those are the sorts of things that we hear. And it's so sad, and because it's just not true for so many cases. And I think those misconceptions come from the care sector not doing enough to shout about all the good that there is and all the amazing stories, the success stories. And so all that people are left to go by is the horror stories that you hear in the media, or the bad experience someone had a couple of years ago. So I think the best way that we can kind of challenge those misconceptions is talking about how amazing care can really be. And I know for a fact, through the families that we've supported, from just people in my own personal life, that their loved ones have moved into care and had a whole new lease of life from making that decision and finding the right environment for them. If they were living alone, they weren't eating properly, they weren't speaking to people, they weren't moving, and they moved into a care home environment and they've got chair yoga every Tuesday and they're having 3 square meals and they've made best friends with Barbara next door, And that's the sort of things that I want people to realise is totally possible. Yeah. And it makes it just a much more joy-filled and exciting part of life.
I can agree more. And what are the elements that care homes or home care can use to help break these misconceptions? Like you mentioned, obviously sharing the stories and those examples. So is it a case of testimonials and case studies? Are they the key elements, that social proof that actually people see care in the wrong way, and actually it's a lot more like this, that and the other?
Definitely. Reviews and testimonials are so powerful. If they're written, great. If they're pictures, videos, even better. And then people want to hear from the individuals that have been receiving that care. I've been in care home environments where I've met residents that have made friends since they've been there, and they are singing the praises of their carers and the staff that make them laugh every day. And that is so powerful. It feels a lot more genuine when it's coming from a resident in the home. There's care homes that have resident ambassadors, so maybe individuals that have been there for a long time, maybe since the home opened, and they can really advocate for the experience of living there. And I think that's the most powerful content and the most powerful way of showcasing the wonderful environment that you've created, because people working in that home will say, oh, I love the residents and I was sat chatting to them, and you can really tell that they're happy here. But someone that's browsing for care, they don't know that. So assume people know nothing and just shout about all the amazing things.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people listening to this podcast, the providers, they might be sitting there like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work to get implemented and do this, that and the other. But sometimes the greatest kind of messages you can send. I saw the other day a LinkedIn post by Michael Butcher, I think, from Blackadder Care. He just took a picture of the fridge and all the different brands of yoghurt that they had in the fridge. That is person-centred care. Yeah. They buy different yoghurts for the different people because they like their own certain brands.
Yeah.
It's just little things like that. If they actually showed that to people looking, because I know now with some family members, they'll eat certain types of food and they'll be particular about that and their routines and stuff. And I think that's also another really good way of breaking misconceptions. So, okay then, to finalise this, I suppose, what's your top bit of advice for families looking for care?
I think a piece of advice that keeps coming back between me and my team for families is remembering that this is about an individual and their wants and their wishes and their desires. And through the stress of looking for care, sometimes that can get lost. And if possible, ask that person what they want and take that person on that journey and give them the control to make their own decisions and empower them to make their own decisions. And don't lose sight of that this is their life. It's nobody else's life. And like I said, if they do need to go into a world of care, then they should hopefully be able to have it in a way that is personal to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lottie, we obviously came and visited the offices. It seems like a very vibrant and young environment of an office space, yourself included, in terms of age. Care has that another misconception that it's all older people looking after even older people. Mm-hmm. It's not like, what would you say to young people looking for a career path? And, what would you say about care?
I guess that those misconceptions that you have mentioned, they are just that. They're misconceptions. It's not the reality. And we are so passionate at Lottie about elevating later life and making things more joyful and pinker and challenging those misconceptions that way. And we've had such amazing feedback from people within the care sector, people looking for care, people looking for careers and different jobs, that this is exciting. And I never realised care could be like this. And that's exactly what we're aiming to achieve. So before I joined Lottie, I didn't know what the next 3 years would have held for me, but it was such an amazing decision, and I'm able to do a mission-driven job that I find truly very fulfilling, and work alongside super talented, passionate people and make tangible, positive change for people, individuals, and also an unloved industry. So what more could you really want?
Hannah, it's great to see you're thriving in this role, and you truly care about care. So thank you very much for the chat today. It's been really insightful. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.